You probably have certain clothes you like to wear because of the color or what's printed on them. Have you ever thought about what's on your clothes as art? Well, Margot Eiseman of Talmadge, Ohio, creates wearable art using silk and dyes.
My name is Margot Eiseman. I'm a textile artist, and right now I'm working on a series of paintings on silk. This is a raw piece of silk here, made in China. Underneath I have a sketch, and what I'm going to be doing now is drawing with this little bottle, and inside here is kelp, which is a seaweed. And when you do this kind of silk painting, you need to create a continuous line. One reason why I like working with this medium is that it's pretty non-toxic. Kelp is used in a lot of our food products. It's seaweed. Okay, I'm finished drawing with the kelp, and it's dried about half an hour. At this point, I'm ready to paint it. What I'm using is a transparent pigment. It's actually really not a dye. And what I'm doing is filling in the background. And as you see, the paint bleeds. It wicks up to your drawn line. I'm using a Japanese sumi brush, which is my favorite kind of brush for this. It holds a lot of pigment, and it keeps a nice point. Okay, then for this background, I'm using a little bit of salt, which gives it a crystal effect. I love color. I love pure color and dyes. You have to work fairly quickly. Every time you dip your brush, you actually get a different solution of pigment, and you want to keep the color as even as possible. And you can see the weight of the dye is pulling the silk down a little bit. Kind of interesting. Dye actually has quite a lot of weight to it, and as it dries, the silk will pop back up again. Now I'm going to go in and repeat that color on one of my glasses, so I have a balance of colors. I'm not really interested in this particular series on realism. I'm using color and shapes more symbolically. I use a still life really as a jumping off point. You can see on the left panels here the effect that the salt has had, and it gives kind of a starry night effect or snow crystallized effect. What the salt does chemically is that it pushes the pigments kind of uneven crystallized effect. I sell these commercially for two purposes. One would be to wear and one would be to frame as a painting. And I like that duality of artwork. A lot of my work deals with the concept of duality, function, non-function. Maybe we'll put a little yellow in this daisy-like flower here. Okay, what I'm doing is painting in the little leaf areas on my fabric. I've looked at this fabric and I'm just giving a little effect of it. And as you see, I've drawn in with the kelp on here in basically a field of ochre, and the kelp is catching that green, just like a little stained glass effect, so that the green will not go into the yellow. And this is a very old technique. The French have been using it for a long time. So, and what happens is when I'm all finished, I will steam this and wash it. And when I wash it, the kelp completely disappears. After these are steam set, they are completely color fast. They can be machine washed, dry cleaned, whatever. So kind of an interesting thing for me is that I am the third generation in my family that works in textiles. My grandfather on the Italian side started a weaving business in New York, and my grandfather on the German side sold silk. So just some little dashes of color, which will end up spreading out because I don't have the kelp in there. So generally the dyes will dry a slightly lighter shade than they look when they're dark. I think we have the stem, and then just double checking to make sure that I've filled everything in, and this piece is completed. It can be dried thoroughly. I usually let them sit for a day before I even steam them. The longer, as you know, with a stain in your clothes, the longer some dye or pigment sits in fabric, the stronger it gets, the stain effect gets.
Instead of creating art on new cloth, Clare Murray of Canton, Ohio combines old textiles and other objects to create memory boxes. Even if an item of cloth is no longer useful, it's still full of memories.
Hi, I'm Clare Murray, and I'm a fiber artist. For most of my career, I have made what are called art quilts. And there's a difference between an art quilt and a traditional quilt. In technique, they look basically the same. We have a patterned or decorated top, as we do in this traditional quilt, and there's batting in it and a backing, and it's all held together by quilting stitches. But in an art quilt, the artist's intent is different. She or he are making something that has some kind of artistic purpose. What I'd like to do for you today is to make a box and combine it with a small quilt. So what's going to happen is the chemical or the solvent is going to release the inks that are in the photocopy and transfer them onto your fabric. So what I usually do is pour a small amount onto the spoon and then pour that onto the photocopy, the back of the photocopy, and rub it in a circular motion. And I'm going to take a little peek and see that it really is working. There we go. Yay. Now, as an artist, I almost always set the photocopy aside and save it. And sometimes I reuse that in a collage or something once all the chemical has dried off of the back of it. And I did some quilting across the arcs that go across the top. And then I cut it out in this, I guess I cut straight across in this arc kind of shape that we have here. And I bound the edges with embroidery floss along here. And then I spent a little bit of time doing some embellishment to make the top of the piece. I like the idea of hard and soft materials that juxtapose against each other. So one of the reasons for making the quilt and this hard box is so that I have that play of materials. I have something soft that's going to read off of or contrast with something hard. I also did that when I was considering what to put in the box. Since I wanted it to be some kind of memory, I decided to work with things from my own past, and so I had a set of dishes, and I guess some people will be horrified that I'm taking these dishes from my great-grandmother, and I broke them and put them in here. And I'm going to layer them in my bottom layer, because first of all, it represents my history or my past because it's about my grandmother. And practically speaking, they're pretty heavy, and so I felt they need to go in the bottom. I like the way that the fragments lay in here, and we see the discolored fronts or backs. We see the little bits of gold that are almost rubbed off. We can see the signature. Because I like that idea of contrasting materials, my next layer is going to be something more soft, and so I'm going to put in some of the cut up patches. This is a reference, becomes a reference to the people in my family who sew, my mom, my grandma, my aunts, and myself, although these pieces that I'm putting in here are mine. I thought about stacking them a number of different ways. There was the possibility of putting them like that. There was the possibility of putting them in bundles and putting them in that way. But I like the way that you see the edges of the quilt, and you see little bits of the fabric and the color, and you see that batting. And that's something that gets hidden in a quilt, and we don't always see it, but it's the thing that makes a quilt. So I wanted it fairly snug because I'm going to put something kind of heavy on top. Then in my next layer, I decided to put in buttons. Okay. I think I'll try that and put in the rest of my layers, and if I feel that I need more, I can do that. Here we already have things that are starting to sift down through. Also a little bit on the back. Things are starting to sift. But it sort of is like life itself. Things shift and get rearranged. So I was trying to think of a way to do that that would be different than the other layers. I do like, seeing the edges of things, just like I like seeing the edges here of the quilt. I wanted to see the edges of the paper, but I'm going to put them in long strips. And then my final layer, at least for today, is going to be these rolls or little balls of batting. And I like batting. I like the feel of it. I like the way it looks. I like what it stands for, that it's about warmth and comfort. And so I wanted it to be seen. And so I'm going to put it next. I've made enough of these rolls, and I can really pack them in there, or I can let them more loose. So I'm going to put my quilts over the past several years have dealt with domestic issues. And for that reason, I use a lot of memory kinds of ideas and clothing in my work.
Teaching materials for Sharing Art are available on the web at wneo.org/sharingart. Funding for this series was provided by the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation and Northeastern Ohio Education Association. NEOEA's members include elementary and secondary teachers, university professors, and support professionals, proudly serving students attending the public schools and colleges of Northeastern Ohio.